everybody. Thanks for joining me. My name's Anna, and I'll be doing an all-level Pilates class today. Before we get started, let's just chat about a couple of things. I'm going to show this class without any props, but if you would like to add anything that you've got at home, small weights in your hands, heavy yoga blocks, get creative. You could use canned goods, rice bag, anything to kind of load the tendons. It'll add a little more challenge for your shoulder stability and also for abdominals. I'll give you a couple options for resistance band if you happen to have one lying around for a couple exercises to make them just a little bit more supportive. And then other than that, if you typically use a cushion behind your head in class, then maybe finding a small pillow, folding a shirt, rolling up a towel, anything to give your head and neck a little comfort. Remember, especially in ab work, if you want to set your head down at any point, that can help if you notice that you're straining. And as always, just making sure, hello. As always, just making sure that you're listening to your breath. So if you notice it getting a little out of control or you notice that you're holding your breath, maybe pause, take a moment, grab a sip of water, and then join when you're ready, right? You're not obligated to do every single exercise that I show, and I'll try to give you some options to level up and level down. So just remember that you're the expert in your own body, so don't push past pain and just kind of listen to how you're feeling today. And with that, let's get started. So we'll start standing, and then we'll kind of make our way down to the mat here. And so whether you just woke up and you're having a leisurely morning, or maybe you've already been doing some desk work, we're gonna start with just a really easy spine twist. So I'm just reaching my arms behind my body, turning my chest and my gaze. Our cervical spine tends to follow where our eyes are going. So if you can let your eyes lead you here, you're gonna get a little bit more rotation through the neck and the upper back. And just kind of checking in with the breath here, right? Don't overthink this too much in terms of form. And as this is feeling good, kind of play with your pace. Maybe you make it a little more swingy and a little dancey. Start to get a little bit bigger. Maybe you're staying a little more quiet at first here. If it feels good to bend the knees, right? We're just kind of noticing what points of our body are holding tension that we don't need. So if you tend to like to grip your bum or lock your knees, just maybe even like shifting weight from side to side to keep it a little bit lighter and a little easy. And this is just observing, seeing how the body's moving, how the breath is moving through the body. And then shake it out here. We're gonna go into some shoulder rolls. So I'm gonna roll shoulders one at a time, and I'm gonna let my thoracic spine keep that little bit of a rotation. You can think about moving from your middle back. So I want my scapula to be really involved in this. So there's an element of protraction, retraction. And again, let it be a little more swingy. So it doesn't have to be super stiff and linear. And then try the other way. So now I'm gonna let my shoulders roll forward. And it's still a full circle. So I'm still rolling back and forward, coming through that retraction and protraction of the shoulder blades, kind of like a swimming motion here. You can think about if there was a little kayaker in your rib cage, the kayaker's kind of leading this motion. And then let's take those hands and we'll clasp our fingers. We're gonna round the upper back. So I'm not folding at the hips here, but I'm just protracting my scapula away from my spine. And then I'm gonna lift my chest up to the ceiling, pull my arms apart. And you can imagine if you're pressing your arms down and along imaginary wall here, and then flip your grip. So whatever thumb or finger you had on top, try the other side. An easy breath at this. Again, you can wiggle. I encourage a little bit of movement here, so it doesn't have to be so precise. We're just getting ready to get into our bodies today. Lifting the chest, noticing if you're locking the knees or maybe falling back into the low back. See if you can think about pushing up so that if I slid a piece of paper underneath your heels, there's a little bit of buoyancy so that you could kind of go in any direction in a given moment's notice. Try one more here. So rounding the spine, easy breath. Inhaling and then exhaling, extending the chest forward. And then let's take a couple side bends. So I'm gonna take my right wrist and I'm gonna take my right leg behind my left leg and come into a nice gentle side bend here. And a really good check as we go back and forth switching sides is if you find you can't breathe, it's easy to kind of catch that inhale and then get stuck in it. Then you've maybe gone a little too far. And if you want more of a calf stretch, just lower that back heel down. I'll show from the side here. A little bit more of a calf stretch. I'm getting a fuller stretch kind of through the front of the hip, all the way through the side of the ribs. Or if you need a little more support, just keep the legs together in that side bend. Should feel kind of nice. And then just drop the arms, shake them out here. We're gonna take just a couple easy knee bends. Nothing too crazy, you don't have to think of it as a wild squat, but just checking to make sure that your knees are tracking over your toes. You can have nice swingy arms, pushing through the feet. Really think about if this was a jump, and you don't have to jump, you could if you wanted to, but think about the energy of pushing down. So again, you've got that element of buoyancy so that you're not locking back in the knees and tucking the pelvis forward, but you're in a pretty action state. And I'm just keeping it nice and swingy. You can think about like a sit to stand if you were gonna sit down in a chair and then stand back up. So you're activating a little bit more through your glutes and hamstrings. And if you're getting a little lower, right, keep that range in a range that feels good for you right now. The lower you get, think about activating the core more away from the thighs every time you come to stand. We'll just take a few more here. Still breathing. And kind of we'll come back to breath as our guide. Last one. Nice. Okay, so we're gonna take a couple standing roll downs. First with our feet about hip distance. I'm gonna imagine that my head's up against, or my spine is up against a wall, nodding that chin, and I'm peeling one vertebrae at a time down. Arms can be easy or they can trace along your legs. Think about really melting one vertebrae at a time. If you tend to lock the knees, just bend them a bit if it sends you backwards. And then go as low as feels comfortable, checking in that we're not holding in the neck or the jaw. Bend the legs if they're not already bent. And then drop your tailbone down, sit a little more into your heels. Scoop your abs away from your thighs. And drag your spine all the way back up. So again, easy breath. You can notice here, if you're favoring the weight not just into heels or toes, but if you have a leg that you prefer, see if you can find a little more unity here. And then bending the legs. Here again, easy neck and shoulders. They're just kind of coming along for the ride. They'll be the last thing to roll up. Easy breath, try that one more time. So peeling that spine down, right? We do this on the mat pretty often. So notice that the pelvis stays for as long as possible. Then when you can't maintain that pelvis position, you're gonna let it rotate. This would be like if we were seated here. Easy breath in. Maybe if you want a little bit more, you're gonna roll up with active straight legs. So a little more inner thigh engagement. We're gonna try a cross-legged variation. So I'm gonna cross one leg in front of the opposite. And if you see from the side, I'm making sure that they're not in the same line, but I've got some space between them. I'm gonna squeeze my inner thighs together and wrap that back hip forward. So if I had headlights like a car, they're shining the same direction. Now find a couple, again, little kind of buoyant heel lifts so you can feel how active your inner thighs have to be. I'm gonna nod my chin again. Hands can trace the legs or they can dangle. And go as low as you feel comfortable here. You're gonna have a little more weight in your front leg. So shift forward if you notice you've kind of fallen back. Push through the balls of the feet, squeeze your inner thighs, and then lift your abdominals. Your glutes and hamstrings will pull the pelvis back upright. Easy breath, and then try that again. Same side here. A little bit of a balance challenge. You'll notice how active your legs have to be. If you tend to grip through the toes, shift the weight forward a little bit more. Maybe again, bend the knees slightly. And hands on the legs are gonna be a little more supportive. So kind of play with that range. How's the breath? Hopefully there's still some oxygen exchange. And then try the other side. I'm gonna cross my opposite leg in front here. Again, I'm making sure that they're staggered so that I don't feel like I'm on a tightrope. Back glute and inner thigh really activating here. And then I've got that nice light feeling in my heels. And just kind of notice here the challenge. We typically are asymmetrical, so the challenge to keep the torso relatively even in this asymmetrical leg position. Easy breath. And then squeezing, pushing through the balls of the feet to really kick through those inner thighs. And let's do last one here. Nice breath in, rounding down, one vertebrae at a time, keeping that back hip forward. Nice little stretch here. And then easy drag. That'll be the last thing to come up as your tailbone lengthens down and your spine stacks up. Nice. All right, let's come all the way down. I'll show you two variations. We've done this before if you've taken my class. Let's try a little reach up to the ceiling just to stretch out, lifting the chest. You can play with kind of reaches side to side. I'll show you from the front here. Just a little bit of rib cage mobilization. Ever taken jazz before? Kind of jazzy. And then just reach those arms down, but try to keep that length you've just created in your torso. We're gonna roll all the way down, but we're gonna come all the way down onto our hands and our knees. So we're gonna walk out here, bending the knees as you need, and then finding your quadruped position. Right, putting something under the knees if you need, maybe rolling your mat, grabbing a t-shirt or a towel. And then take a couple scap isolations here. So I wanna make sure that I'm not in internal rotation, but that the support's really coming from underneath. So my fingertips are either forward or maybe even a little bit turned out. I'm gonna let my ribs fall between my shoulder blades. My shoulder blades come towards my spine, my abs still lifted, and then I press away and protract. So my pelvis is staying pretty steady. There's obviously a little movement above and below the shoulders since our body's connected. So we'll follow through here. It's kind of warming up those shoulder blades. And notice that as you press away, the power really comes from the ground and then reaches all the way through the back here. And I've got my hands just a little bit domed, so I'm not putting all of the weight on the outside edge of the wrist, but it's a little bit more even, and I'm almost in a slight kind of external rotation as if I was screwing two lids away from each other. And then once you found this position, leave the shoulders in a neutral and just find a couple pelvic curls. So it's just like the pelvis portion of our cat-cow. So I'm thinking about scooping the abs in as my tailbone draws down. If you had a tail, it'd be like drawing your tail between your legs. And then I'm extending through my pelvis, opening my sits bones, kind of that happy puppy dog tail. And I'm going back and forth here. And again, there'll be like a little reflection through the rest of your spine, but just kind of focusing with your breath on isolating that motion, right? Sometimes when we do things that are really familiar, we go into sort of autopilot. Like cat-cow is a pretty familiar movement for most of us. And then just find a nice, easy neutral here. We're gonna shift back and forth just to kind of reset the hip socket. So I'm gonna shift back by opening my sits bone. So I'm gonna try to keep neutral in my pelvis as long as possible. Then I'm gonna think about pressing out with my outer hips and dragging with my arms to come back into my tabletop position. And we're just shifting, and we're only gonna shift so far as we don't come into this tucked position. So long spine, sits bones opening, you should feel kind of like your thighs are sliding and gliding into the hip socket. And then finding those outer hips, abdominals, and some activation through the back to bring me forward. Try just a couple more here. Easy breath. And then we'll find that nice tabletop position again. So now without letting anything shift through my torso or my hips, keeping that active pressure out of the ground, I'm gonna lengthen one leg back. Keeping that foot on the ground, you can tuck it or keep the toes long, but I'm just trying to keep that supporting side of my pelvis nice and steady. So we're looking for any tipping, any side bending, keeping the core engaged. Easy breath here. So this is just that nice fold at the hip socket, because we're gonna do quite a bit of ab work with the same position. Obviously it's a different plane, so a little bit different sensation. And if that starts to feel good, maybe that leg extends back. And as we're extending back, we're just making sure again that there's no change in the hips or the spine. The elbows haven't started to sink and bend. Got a couple versions here. And if this is feeling good, maybe, and again, toes tucked or long on your supporting side, whatever feels better, maybe the opposite arm just kind of floats up. So in a really nice, easeful lift. And I'm concentrating a little bit more on my supporting limbs. So they're actually activating more when I lift up. And then a little glute and hamstring through that back leg. If this is still feeling really, really groovy, maybe you add a little float out to the side. So my arm's coming into a T and my leg is staying on that same plane, but I'm rotating into my T bird dog. Still staying really stable. So abs are on. Again, my pelvis is still staying in the same place in space. So I have to let my thigh bone rotate within the hip socket. Take one more of your variation on each side. Now, lots of shoulders. Check in with your breath. Once you've evened yourself out here, we're gonna come down to a little forearm plank. So for a forearm plank, we're gonna measure hands and elbows, and then you can have your palms up or down, whatever feels more comfortable for you. And you can step one leg back, and then your second leg to meet it. And you can also do your forearm plank on your knees as long as your hips aren't sagging. So play with which variation you're ready for. We're just gonna hold for a couple breaths here. I want you to think about if I yank to the front of your pants, so you're really scooping your low abdominals, and then I want you to think about pulling the mat apart and dragging your elbows towards your toes. And you should feel your low core turn on just a little bit more. And then take an easy breath in and exhale, bringing those legs back. You can press back into a child's pose for a moment. And then walking your hands back towards your knees. We're gonna cross our ankles and come to a seat. And we're gonna start with a little seated roll back. So ideally, we wanna sit as high as possible on our sits bones. So if it's challenging to do this with the legs, maybe extend the legs a little bit further away and flex the feet. And that can give you a little bit more space here. So we'll start with the hands behind the thighs, gently rolling back. So that same motion that we just did in quadruped, now we've just switched the position. Rolling back off the sits bones and then re-registering neutral. Really small motion for this first one here. I've got a little bit of assistance, the backs of my legs and my arms. So you can think about pushing through your heels and also dragging your heels towards your bum. And then I've got some tension here, so my upper body's helping support this motion. And then if you want to make it a little bigger, maybe floating those arms up. So I'm just rolling the pelvis back and maintaining that shape in my torso and returning back onto my sits bones. So we want to watch out for undulating. So I'm arching through my back and then my upper body's coming up. As I roll back, pubic bone rotates towards my chest. I keep the same shape. So you have to think about almost leading with a subtle crunch in the upper body to come back up. An easy breath, you're looking at your pelvis. Both sides of those hips should be rotating at the same time. Shoulders are easy, right? I can turn my head from side to side. I love an exhale on this one. And then an inhale to challenge. And then an exhale to roll back up. So we're gonna take this one all the way down. And then you can pull your legs into your chest. Give them a little squeeze. You can place the feet a little bit wider than your hips here and just take an easy windshield wiper. So again, kind of noticing the difference from side to side, how those thighs are falling in to the hip socket. And if you notice you have more internal or external rotation on one side versus the other. So we'll take those legs into our bent leg position. So my feet are in line with my sits bones, flat on the ground, knees to the ceiling here. And we're just gonna start with a couple shoulder bridge to warm up. You can have your hands down by your side, maybe to the ceiling if you notice you like to tense, or maybe hovering just above the ground to challenge the abdominals. So those variations, we're gonna do, again, the same motion. So rolling through, initiating with my abdominals, my pelvis, got some glutes and hamstrings here, and then lengthening to lower back down. And we just wanna make sure we're not going so high in our shoulder bridge that we're sitting into the neck. So kind of feel like the bottom of those shoulder blades are still on your mat. And kind of another piece again of articulation, like our standing roll down. We're taking all these different positions and different segments of the spine in Pilates and then articulating through those pieces. And just checking to see both sides are long. You could take a little peek down to make sure that the hips, that headlight idea, they're both shining the same way. So we're watching for one hip dropping. And let's take one more of whichever variation you're playing with, knees tracking over your toes. And then we'll reach our hands back behind our head if they're not there already. And we're gonna come up into a little ab prep. So I'm gonna sweep my arms to the ceiling and I'm exhaling to lift. I'm gonna take a breath in. I wanna notice if we're not in imprint yet, so if I'm tucked or my bum is squeezed, can you hold and release that? And then I'm gonna lengthen and lower back down. So for some of us, that might not be as high as we're used to coming up, inhaling and exhaling. But I want you to see if you can ungrip bum, keep the hip flexors easy, pubic bone relatively parallel to the ground and to the ceiling. And if you need a little more support, just bring those hands behind the head. Inhaling to challenge, and then exhaling to lengthen back down. The other thing is you want to check in with the nod of the chin. So as my arms are tracing, I'm nodding to come up, and that's going to help. I'm increasing pressure through my ribs and back to decrease pressure through my shoulders and my head. Try two more like this. Inhaling and exhaling. Checking in with that bum. Hip flexors are easy here. And lengthening back down. Last one. Inhale to challenge. And exhale to lower back down. Nice, you can pull your legs into your chest, and then let's just take a gentle spine twist. So we'll let both legs fall towards the right here. Arms can be in a T, or if you want to use that top hand on your thigh to keep the legs easy, and then rotate, let the head and shoulders loll to the left. Maybe closing your eyes. Kind of noticing, oftentimes it can be challenging to breathe in your spine twist. So using that inhale to find access to space that maybe feels a little restricted, and that exhale to release tension. You can sweep that arm all the way up and over, take your legs into your chest, and then just let them fall to the other side. And again, you've got that option to just stay in a T, maybe bring the hand to the top of that thigh, gently turning the head. And just taking kind of observation, what is the difference, similarity from side to side? Where do you feel the stretch or the range or the tightness? Your skull get really heavy on the ground. And then we'll sweep that arm all the way around, up and over, and then bringing the legs back into the chest. We're gonna bring the legs down and we'll come into our imprint position. So for this, we're gonna activate not just the TA and the pelvic floor, but we've also got those obliques. So by drawing my ribs and hips together using my abs, I'm finding length in my spine. So you might find that your back is now connected with the mat. Might not always be, so just check in that we're not smashing the back or squeezing the bum to create this. And a good test is just to float that leg to tabletop and notice if anything changed in the torso or the pelvis. And a couple things that we're looking for as we exhale to float, alternating sides, Is the ribs wanting to splay, maybe the abs popping, or the back arching away from the mat? And so an exhale can be really helpful to keep those nice and steady. And if this is feeling groovy, this alternating leg lift, you can up the challenge a bit by taking it into your tabletop position. And if hands on your ribs and abs is helpful, hands down by your side. Again, if you notice you like to tense or lock in your lats, arms up is a really great variation. For more challenge, always arms floating overhead. You're gonna add a little more challenge to those upper abs now. We're just gonna take a couple more like this with your various arm positions. If you want a little more still, just start to tap a little bit further away. Easy exhale to reach. And torso still nice and even and long. So maybe even tactily kind of feeling the difference between the hips and the ribs and noticing if you start to do a little side bend, if you've got a bit of compensation. And then we're gonna take this into a bicycle. But instead of our usual kind of out and in bicycle, we're gonna add a little dip. So I'm extending, dipping, like you're dipping your toe into, I don't know, taffy, molasses, honey. Think about something that you enjoy that's sweet. And so we're adding a little bit of a circle here. And your higher circle is gonna be a little easier, right? And a little more challenge would be your lower circle, making sure that opposite leg isn't coming any closer to your torso than above your hip. So now, just to confuse our brains, we're gonna do the opposite. We're gonna go down and up. So now it's like you're kicking something forward. If you've ever played kick the can, this is a very delicate balladic version. And it's okay if you get a little messed up in your choreography. How's the breath? Again, lower is gonna be a little more challenging. Higher will be a little more supportive. Try 2 more here. Just getting the abs warmed up. And then you can take a little break, hug your legs, maybe pull your knees wide towards your armpits for a little hip flexor compression, and maybe roll those ankles back and forth a couple times. So we're gonna go into a little shoulder bridge. So place those feet back down in your bent leg position. Again, you've got those arm options. And we're gonna roll all the way up and we're gonna stay at the top. We're gonna stabilize through that left glute, hamstring, quad, inner thigh. Abs are on to make sure we're not popping up too high. And we're gonna float that right leg into tabletop. Couple options here. Number 1 is just taking a little tap. So I'm just gonna keep that leg bent. You'll notice the tendency of the left hip to drop when you reach those toes down. So think about actually pressing more through your supporting leg, pushing that hip up a little higher every time you tap down. If this is feeling easy, maybe you try your straight leg version. And so for this one, either a flexed foot or a pointed foot, try to keep those thighs equal so we won't go down past that opposite leg. And noticing that the right hip might have a tendency to start to lean or drop to the side. So you're just gonna do your little body scan. Hopefully this bum's starting to feel a little more excited. And then with either a straight leg or a bent leg, we're gonna take a couple taps. You're gonna tap that bum and lift. And I'm using this leg too to try to keep my pelvis even. So I am still working from both sides of my pelvis. And it can get really easy to become a rib tap. So the range will feel probably as you fatigue, even smaller. Hand can always give you some good feedback here. Try about 3 more like this. 2. Last one. And then you can place that foot back down. Take a nice breath in. And then roll all the way down through the spine. And if you want to take a little windshield wiper in between here, reset, check in to make sure the torso hasn't migrated. We're going to do all of that on the other side. So roll it up, checking in to make sure that the hips are square, abs are engaged. We'll float that opposite leg up. So the first piece, level 1, is our bent leg tap. You can take breaks if you need it. If you want to advance a little more load into this, extending that leg, you're going to reach it long, really make sure both of those hips are opening. If you had like a dowel in between your hips here, I think of like a paper towel dowel, you're going to keep the hips really steady. You've got your car headlights reaching up towards the ceiling. And you're thinking about almost pressing more through your supporting side as your leg reaches away. That length will give you more stability. Whether you have that leg straight or bent now, bring it back up. We're gonna take our bum taps. So I'm breaking right at the hip joint and then setting the bum down, glute and hamstring, pull me back up. Watch for that knee wanting to buckle off to one side or the other. And notice if the hips start to either twist or if you notice the torso doing a little bit of a side bend here. Got just a couple more here. Check in with the breath. Last two. And last one. Then you can place that leg down nice and carefully. Take a breath in at the top. Reach your arms overhead and then exhale. Roll all the way back down. Nice. So let's do a couple ab variations here. We'll start with the legs all the way together, finding that imprint position. So engaging through the obliques to lengthen the spine. We're gonna let the legs just fall about 45 degrees to the left. I'm still relatively weighted on my tailbone here. But I'm gonna use my abs and my inner thigh, exhale, to bring those legs back up to center. Letting the legs fall just like 45 degrees, a little past my shoulder, and then exhaling, drawing the legs back up. So I want you to notice that inner thigh and that outer hip, and then the abdominals work together to bring those legs back up to center. If that's feeling good, flip those legs into tabletop. I'm still in my imprint position. Now I'm gonna do the same thing about 45 degrees, and then exhaling, bringing those legs back up. So I'm not really going so far. I am increasing the weight towards that hip that the legs are going towards, but I'm not going so far that I'm completely off weighting my opposite hip. Arms can be out to a T, arms can be bent, arms could be to the ceiling for a little more balance challenge. You'll notice you have to work a little bit more in the outer hips if you're floating your arms up. And then if you want a little more still, bring those hands behind your head and then come up into a crunch. So now there is a little more element of balance. Again, just that kind of 45-degree angle. Your outer hip will be a helpful implement here. And think about really spiraling. My ribs come in, inner thigh, low core. I feel my core. I hope you guys do too. And try one more on each side. Last one. Nice, and then take a little rest. We'll extend that left leg long. Pull that right leg into your chest and give it a little squeeze. If circles feel good here, take a couple of those in both directions. Letting that hip flexor just relax and really using your arms to guide this. We'll take this all the way over into a twist. So this is too intense, just draw that bottom leg back under for a little more support. And you have those same options of keeping that arm on top of the thigh to add a little bit more pressure so you don't have to tense through that hip. If it feels good, to turn the head, play with where that arm is in space. Maybe bending it at a 90-degree angle for a little bit more pec, a little more connection through that scapula. And then we'll take that arm again overhead, sweeping it, give that leg one more little squeeze. And I promise we'll do the other side, but first we're gonna do a little oblique exercise. We get some abs in between our abs. So bring those hands back behind your head here. We're in our imprint position again. So I've got one leg bent and one leg in tabletop. I'm gonna come up on an inhale and I'm gonna exhale, twisting my left rib towards my right inner thigh, and then I'm gonna lengthen back down. So again, inhale and exhale, and then lengthening. So what we wanna watch out for is just kind of tilting so that I'm resting on my elbow. I want to think about coming up and then finding that rotation so that my right elbow or right shoulder is also off the ground. If this feels good and you want a little bit more, bring both legs into tabletop, and you'll extend your left leg long each time you come up into your ab prep. Nice breath. Really checking in again that you're supporting your head. So sometimes when ab work gets a little bit tricky, check in with the breath first to make sure that you are in fact really breathing. And then think about that idea that as you sink your ribs, the increase in weight in your torso is what naturally kind of brings up your head and shoulders, rather than trying to lead with the chin. Sort of let that lift happen a little bit more naturally. And then let's take a little rest here. You can pull that left leg into your chest and then lengthen that right leg out. Give it a nice squeeze, maybe pulling it to your armpit. Taking those circles clockwise and counterclockwise if that feels good. And this can be really nice to notice how that thigh is sitting in your hip socket. And then we'll take that leg all the way across the body. Again, if this is a little too extreme, just draw that bottom leg in and that'll give you more support in your low back. And you can keep that hand on the leg or go into a T if that feels better. Add that twist of the upper body, maybe just keeping the gaze to the ceiling. Nice big breath here, playing with maybe a change in your arm position to change where you're getting that stretch. And it's okay because we're obviously not totally even. It's okay if you want a different stretch on a different side, if the body's calling for something. And then we'll sweep that arm all the way up and over. And then draw that leg back. Give it one more little squeeze. And we'll even out our obliques here. So bringing that right leg to your bent leg position and my left leg to tabletop. And then imprint, hands clasped. Maybe try clasping the opposite direction that you typically do without thinking about it. And then with our imprint, we'll inhale and exhale to curl up and twist. And so again, I'm trying to keep this shoulder blade off the ground. And I'm exhaling to lift. And then maybe just take a little peek down and notice if you're side bending or shifting pretty significantly in your torso. Rotation is a pretty hard motion, I think, for most of us to do without a lot of compensation. So it's good to kind of just check in and notice. And oftentimes the range of motion will be a little smaller than we think. And if this is feeling groovy, right, you can bring both your legs up and then you'll extend that left leg down each time. And remembering that that range right higher is going to be a little more supportive. Lower is going to be a little more challenging. Really open up the front of that hip, use that glute and hamstring. If you're taking that variation, keeping your bent leg a little further can also heat the core up a little bit more. And just making sure that the neck isn't straining by leading with the chin, but we're really using those abdominals that increase ribs sliding down the front of the body. Try one more here. And then take a little rest. Nice work. Do you guys notice which oblique is stronger? Because I do. So try to take a slow and controlled roll up. If you don't want it, then you can take a couple of rock and rolls. But just finding that same press, maybe hands behind your thighs here to come up. And then we'll do a little roll down. So if you had a band, this would be a really great spot to put the band underneath your feet if this is something that you're working on. Weight can also help if you're working on your roll up, but I'll show you some good unweighted variations. The first is that flexed foot, bent legged version. And so if I've got my hands behind my thighs with that pushing and pulling, feeling through my heels to activate my hamstrings and glutes, and then my arms, I'm gonna start with that same roll back of my pelvis. And then I've got the support pressing my heels into the ground, pulling with my arms. I can lengthen and lower all the way back down. And then to come up, I can do the same thing. So I can come up with my crunch and then pull. And for this one, I like to think of really digging my heels in to lengthen back up. So it's our first kind of supportive version. If you're familiar with roll down, maybe you go into your full arms with slightly bent legs. That will be, again, you can have feet down or heels, feet flexed. Or if you're comfortable with your full version, you can bring your legs all the way together so that you can find a little bit more inner thigh connection. And this can sometimes be a really big piece. If you notice that there's that little pop on the way up, go slower on the way down because it's a really great way to build strength with smooth breath here. And then think about activating through your inner thighs and really using your smooth exhale to come all the way up. So those are kind of two moments. Sometimes holding the breath can cause a little bit of a challenge, and sometimes losing that inner thigh connection. And if you want to go for that big stretch, by all means, please do if those hamstrings are calling to you. We're going to take about 2 more here. Inhaling and exhaling. And last full roll up. So we'll come all the way back up. We'll torture ourselves one more time. Doesn't it feel nice though? Inhaling and exhaling all the way up. Take a nice little stretch forward. You're going to open your legs out just a bit here. So shoulder distance, maybe wider. You can bend your legs if you need the support. First version, we'll just take that spine stretch forward. So like our standing roll up, but I'm going to trace my legs as I roll forward. Then I'm going to really activate through my abdominals, widening my sits bones to come back up. If you're doing your straight leg version, here's my, it's like a crunch, seated as I roll forward, but I'm staying upright in my pelvis, so I'm not going to stick my bum back like a stretch. And then I'm using my abdominals to roll it back up. Try one more like that. Exhaling. I know this one can be either a frustrating exercise or kind of like, I'm not really sure what the point of this is. Ideally, we're getting a back stretch and we're also getting some ab work. So if that's helpful, inhaling and exhaling, really relaxing your head too if you notice you tend to grip. Try twisting. So I'm going to bring my right hand to my left leg and my left fingertips out to the side. And I'm going to take that same rolling down with a little rotation and then coming back up. And then I'll try the other side. So we're just adding a little bit of that rotation. And then returning. And again, really rotating from the sternum. So it's not just my arms doing it, but they're moving because my thoracic spine is initiating it. And easy breath here, abs, that wide sit bone feeling. Notice if you're maybe favoring one sit bone more than the other. Last one on each side. So it's really a spine stretch. If you've taken kind of like hatha yoga, where they do a lot of seemingly small movements, but ridiculously deep stretching. It's kind of just what the focus is, more spine than, say, hamstrings. So let's come onto our hands and knees, crossing those ankles here. And then finding, again, that nice, so watching for internal rotation, but finding that nice placement with the wrists, slightly domed hands, and finding my stack. We're gonna play with a little cat-cow bird dog. So if you are still working on your reaching and tapping, maybe you're gonna revisit that extension, possibly a lift, and coming back down. If that was feeling really good, we're gonna find that float, but we're gonna add the spine. So I'm gonna keep my limbs up, really pressing through supporting. And I'm pressing so much through my supporting limbs that my back is actually curving and I'm able to bring my floating limbs underneath me, maybe even touching knee to elbow or forehead, nose to knee to elbow. And I'm keeping that press out, 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 out. And then I get to come up into a little extension. And I'm not dumping in the back or sitting. So my supporting limbs, outer hip, shoulder, they really never get a break here. Try just 2 more like that. So again, it's not so much these limbs leading, it's that my supporting limbs are leading so much, my spine, my abs, my outer hip. And that creates so much space. I'm hollowing so deeply that I have so much space underneath me. And then again, my shoulder is not gonna fall to my ear, but I'm extending out. And try that one more time. So pushing, 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 pushing outer hip. Hopefully breathing. And then extending out, lots of balance. And then you can bring that arm back down. Before we go to the other side, that arm that you just used, we're gonna rotate that foot out and come into a little side bend. So I've got my knee, supporting hand and leg all in kind of one long line. I'm gonna rotate that bottom rib forward so that again, I'm nice and organized, hips, ribs, shoulders to the front. And then I'm just gonna take a couple leg floats up and down. Yeah, and here again, this idea of I'm growing so much out of my supporting limbs. A little bit of a domed hand here. Your foot can be, my foot's totally jello. You can activate through the heel as long as you feel like that shin isn't doing all your work, or you can go totally relaxed. And imagine if there's a wall behind you, I'm kind of scraping my heel up and down that wall. Abs are lifted. You should feel like this hip is supporting you too, stacked over that knee. And then try a couple circles. And I love to circle a little bit behind my supporting leg so that I know that my bum's really doing this work and I'm not getting really ginchy up here in the front of the hip. And then try a couple circles the other way. And then just kind of check in with that rotation. Easy breath, length through the spine. Hopefully some bum work. And then you can come back here to hands and knees. So that hand that we just supported with is now our supporting hand for our opposite side of our bird dog. So again, you can take those first variations we did at the beginning. If you would like to take this challenge, we're gonna do it 3 times. So I'm extending my arm and leg out, but I'm pressing so much through outer hip, shoulder, and abs. I'm scooping, 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 that I can create this hollow space to bring maybe my knee, elbow, head together. And then instead of sinking, I'm pressing out, 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 out to extend. And we'll try that easy breath, nice and slow. Okay, when we move a little slower, we're building more strength in those in-between moments versus when we move really fast. Sometimes we're just building strength on one end or the other, or we're kind of avoiding the part that maybe is a little more challenging. Kind of why we do our full roll-ups with control rather than just kind of throwing ourselves through them. Hopefully you feel your bum a little bit. So then switch. I'm gonna shift to my hand that was working, rotate my shin here, and then extend my leg long. I've got hand, knee, and foot all in one line, and I'm just checking that bottom rib to make sure that I'm not turned towards the ground. And then I'm just gonna float that leg up and down. Yeah, and my pelvis is open in the front, so watch for sitting back towards that heel, and maybe even bringing a hand back here to notice my heels lifting, just nice and light. Checking in with that supporting arm. If you're kind of flattening through every knuckle, find a little bit of a dome and some length through the spine, and then you can play with those circles. And just easy breath. The arm can be anywhere. You could move it around if that's nice to distract yourself. And then circle the other way. Kind of keep refreshing this position. Quite a bit of support here in your shoulder. And then take a nice little break. Come down off the arms for a moment. You can take a child's pose, knees together or knees wide. See if you can really relax your forehead onto the ground. We'll take about 2 more breaths here. Sinking the hips. And when you're ready to come up, bring those arms a little closer to you and then find your core so you can roll up without kind of over gripping through the back. So we'll cross our ankles again and come back to a seat here. We're gonna do a little reverse tabletop. So I've got my legs a little wider than I would for my shoulder bridge, but a similar feeling through the hips. My hands can either be out to the side or out to the back. That'll be the most supportive. For a little more challenge, you can bring your hands facing your hips. Whichever position you choose to do, make sure you're rolling your shoulders like we do in the warm-up, up and back to open the chest. And then when you're ready, you're gonna exhale, find your abs, find your glutes and hamstrings, right? My legs are working, and I'm looking forward to keep my neck in a good place. You can also check too to see if one hip's dropping. You can press through that leg a little more, and you'll feel like you've got more weight in your heels here. Just take one more breath, and then lower back down. Nice, okay, so now we're gonna do a teaser balance. So for this one, rolling back off your sits bones. Our first version would be floating one leg up, kind of finding this core stability, maybe bringing your second leg to meet it, maybe letting go. Now in this position, we wanna make sure we're not arching through, but rather I'm trying to round, and it should feel like I'm constantly kind of re-scooping the abdominals each time. Maybe extending the legs up, maybe playing with reaching the arms a little further away from us or up to the ceiling. It's gonna be a little more challenging. Hold for about 2 more breaths here in whatever variation you would like. And then gently taking those legs, rocking the spine forward. We're gonna take another round of our reverse tabletop. So set up those hands in whatever position you liked best. Roll the shoulders up and back, and then pressing through the feet. Glutes, hamstrings, quads, inner thighs. Gazing forward. This is a really nice stretch because we do so much stuff. Computers, driving, right forward in our world. It's nice to get some extension. Last breath here. And then returning the bum back down. For our last set of teaser, if you would like to add a little twist to make it more exciting, I'll show you that variation. So any of those balance versions, if you're working towards no arms, keep checking in with that breath. Inner thighs are gonna be a really helpful piece here. If you want a little excitement, you're gonna add kind of that oblique twist. You could have hands behind your thighs or floating. You're gonna tilt the knees to one side. Again, you're still a little on that hip, but you're shifting 75–80% of your weight to the opposite hip. Then you're gonna come back to center. Then you're gonna try that other side. Whee, it's kind of fun. And then come back to center. And the idea is you're not extending down and pumping up, which is totally an exercise, but we're gonna challenge trying to stay in this plane. Obviously, arms out is gonna be a little more work. And as long as you're breathing smoothly, you'll be inhaling and exhaling as you switch from side to side. Try one more on each side or take 2 more breaths if you're holding your balance. And then you can bring your legs down. Woo! Take a little windshield wiper here. Nice work. We're gonna cross our ankles and we're gonna come back to our hands and knees just for a moment to slide those legs back down. And we'll take just a couple extensions to finish here. So legs are about shoulder distance, hands are by ribs. There's some activation through my glutes, hopefully we feel them now, and the core. I'm gonna roll my shoulders up and back, so just like I did in that warm up. And then I'm gonna lead with my rib cage, extending my chest forward, and then lengthening the spine back down. And I love to inhale here because it naturally kind of follows the expansion of the lungs. And if this feels good, that roll back and lift, then you can just bring the arms back by your sides. Take that same kind of roll to engage. So the arms, shoulder blades are neutral, and then you can float the arms and the legs off. So I'm finding this initiation of shoulder blades, and then my body follows. And you can start to smooth that out, so it doesn't have to be quite so many pieces. But just noticing that we're not lifting from this position, but from this position in the shoulder blades. You can point the toes if you like that too. You can leave them easy. Once you've taken your fill of extension, you can bring your arms back by your rib cage here, find those abs, and then press back to take a child's pose. Again, knees close together or far apart. If you want to add a side to side, you can bring your left arm across your body, either right arm lengthened out as well, or you can bring that right arm by your right knee and find a little side bend, lengthening that left sit bone back. And then switching sides here. So again, either keeping both arms out or maybe bringing that left arm by your left knee to give you a little more pressure to find some length here through that right side. And then coming back up here, we'll finish by finding again that figure four, or quadruped rather, and then piking the hips up to walk, whether it's hands to feet or feet to hands, to find that forward fold. And just kind of how we started class, bend those legs, relax your torso, find the abdominal, really sit back into the heels and drop the bum, and then drag your spine all the way back up to standing. Maybe reach those arms up to the ceiling again, finding a little bit of space between your ribs and your hips here. And when you reach your arms back down by your side, just see if you can keep that space that you created with that arm reach. Nice work today, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me. I will leave you there, and I will see you next week. And if you have any questions, feel free to email the studio. We love to answer your questions and to hear from you. And just keep checking the online schedule as we have new things popping up all the time. Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll see you guys next time.